We're talking about race in America. That was a poll that came out on October the 27th, back late last year, suggesting that a majority of the American people, 51%, hold an explicit anti-black attitude, and that's up from 49% in 2008. So we're really concerned about that. 97 KHVN, and my guess, we have Roland Reed with us at this time, and Roland, a diversity training expert here in our Dallas-Fort Worth community. And first of all, Roland, I want to thank you for joining us on Heaven 97. How are you today?
Just fine, and you, Robert. Glad to be here with you.
We're doing real good. And once again, we thank you so very much for your time and being with us. Now, Roland, just a little bit about you. You're a diversity expert and other things that you're doing. You know, we're a gospel radio station here. The majority of us are Christians here, but we don't limit that in terms of our conversations. A little bit about Roland Reed.
I own a company called Consumer and Market Insights. We are a marketing research, training, and event management company. So with marketing research, we focus a lot on customer service, customer satisfaction, all those things that have to do with people and making a difference and an impact. And, of course, the training branch has a lot to do with diversity, customer service, as well as satisfaction internally and externally. And it all works well together, including putting on events and facilitation. So our key focus is customer service. How can we make a difference? And really, it's all about going back to the basics as well, common courtesy.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And Roland, are you from Dallas-Fort Worth? Did you grow up in this area? A married woman, member of a church? Or
I'm a native Texan, and I attend Covenant Church in Carrollton. As a matter of fact, I've been an active member there for over 20 years now. So very involved. Got married in the church. Rear my children in the church, so yes, it's just a major part of my life.
And is that Pastor Mike Evans?
Pastor Mike Hayes.
Mike Hayes, that's right. That for a long time, that Covenant Church, that's a very, very established church and highly, highly anointed quite some time here. But we are here, Roland, to talk about diversity. And this particular AP poll, which is a very, very interesting report here, but just some basic questions. America re-electing President Barack Obama. Have the nation accepted this president?
Really, what we're hearing is nothing new. I think the good thing is we're talking about it. We know that a lot of progress has been made, but there are rumblings, and you still see things that are going on. You know, even with some of the polls and some of the research shows that there really has not been a lot of difference or change in terms of views or perspectives or how things have progressed when you look at it overall in terms of people's perception. That's when you just look at the general population as well. But then on the other hand, you hear so many things, too, just on a personal level, especially the African-American community and young children and young boys can truly aspire to say, I'd like to be President of the United States, because it's something that has been seen. And if you look at our generation, you know, it's almost like President Obama was initially elected. We can all remember where we are and what we were doing at that time, as well as the feeling we felt. So in some ways, when you look at it overall, we still have a long ways to go. But when you look at those other areas of what it has done to us, for us as a community and as a group of people, we know it has truly made a difference.
Now, racial prejudice in America, racial prejudice, how would you, Roland, as a diversity training expert, how do you define racial prejudice?
With our diversity training and what we've done across the country, we oftentimes define prejudice as, of course, is where you are prejudging. You've made a judgment on something. And usually we see that race is something that is focused on more readily than a lot of things else because it's so evident. And then when we look at African American and white or black and white, that tends to be more extreme. We can look at that for our history and things of that nature. But going back to the diversity part is in the training, usually when something happens to us as people, we have to find a way or justify a reason why it is. A lot of times it's easier to go for the obvious, and race is obvious. But a lot of times, too, it could be something like style, personality, but those things are less obvious, and they take a little bit of time, and that means you've got to get to know a person, and you can't prejudge. Even, too, with the judgments we make, that also goes back to our history, our experiences, our background, and one thing, too, even when you look at us racially as a country, it really really wasn't that long ago with segregation. Because if you think about it, some of us experienced it, our parents and our grandparents.
Yes.
So our history is really short as a country to the point of where we've come. So in some ways we've come a long ways, but yet those experiences still affect us in a lot of ways.
Yes, indeed. Once again, we're talking here with Royland Reed, and Royland is a diversity training expert, and we're talking about the changing face of America. We're talking about race in America, if you will. As a diversity training expert, I can imagine you have been in the middle of a lot of sessions. Can you remember the toughest question that you might have had about race, or have you had any that stumped you? Or
I've done interviews all over the country,
yes,
even in the past. And I wouldn't say it's something that necessarily stumped me, but you do hear people say, well, if we have a black president, what else is there? You know, we've arrived. So, of course, we know that's a misconception because you're not looking at it holistically. Then you sometimes hear other things about, well, what is really the big deal in terms, we know it's radio stations and media groups wouldn't be talking about it.
Yes, it did.
But even taking it a step further, if you even look at, you know, there were some really powerful occurrences that happened. And fortunately, some of them got, as tragic as they were, got a lot of media attention, even including the Trayvon Martin.
Yes.
And when we look at that, we were so clearly polarized in a lot of ways of how that situation was perceived. And unfortunately, it was polarized almost right down racial lines.
Well, once again, talking here with Royland Reed, a diversity expert. We're talking about race here in America. How far have we come? How far do we have to go? And it's ironic that we're talking about this during Black History Month. And once again, Royland, you've just got such a distinguished background. You talk to many, many people across the country in interviews like this. America, I don't know if you've ever heard of a very interesting psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. She wrote a book called The ISIS Papers. And that book is a very interesting, I guess, clinical look at racism in America. Has anybody set this nation down and put us on a couch and allowed us to talk about it? You know how sometimes when you get sick, you go to a psychiatrist, you just want to talk about it? Does the nation need to be on a couch to sit down and talk this thing out?
I think a lot of times we all have to look at ourselves first because, you know, we've talked about one angle of it, but the other part, too, is, and oftentimes here from more or less mainstream than anywhere else, is sometimes people may say something inappropriately or they really didn't mean it or didn't know any better. We also, as a people, have to learn to be forgiving and really hear, because when that happens, then people close up, they do their water cooler talk, and then it goes back under. And when somebody says something inappropriately, let's make sure they get, you know, especially if their hearts are right and they really want to learn and change. Let's let them say, I'm sorry, get an understanding, and make a change. And we know that's straight from the scripture, too. You know, when my people are called by my name,
yes, indeed,
we need to humble ourselves, seek his face, and turn from our ways. So even applying that, as you can see, I said it in layman's terms, we've got to allow people who don't know any better and really want to change to be able to do that. So that brings healing from our side of forgiveness, but it also allows the other side to get educated and for light to be shown on the situation.
And Roland, you know, there's been a lot of talk about trying to get America to pay reparations to black Americans whose ancestors were enslaved here in this country. We all knew about the 40 acres and a mule and how I think it was President Andrew Jackson didn't sign it, or somehow or another that piece of legislation just died as a result of something happened, I guess, legislatively in Congress, or either maybe the president didn't sign it. Reparations, should black Americans even be thinking about that? Is that even conceivable to think that our nation would pay the equivalent of 40 acres and a mule to the descendants?
I know that can go either way, but in my opinion, Robert, I think it's more productive for us as a people to look for ways to move forward.
Yes.
And we want to remember the past, but how much can we really, we look at factor, you know, for, what we could really get. But if you look at, there are some organizations who have wonderful concepts. I mean, many of them out there that are looking at how do we create wealth as a people. That's more than just getting a fish, but how do we learn how to fish and move forward for ourselves. And I just happen to serve on a Mission Hope, and they're throughout the country. But they talk about wealth management. That was so pleased I got to go to the inauguration, and they had the National Day of Service. So I had my children with me, and with my son, who kind of has an affinity towards math and money. So I'm like, we're going to get him developed. But for an example, an exercise that when we stopped at the Operation Hope table, what the volunteer, he has a nonprofit organization, was doing is he was teaching my son to look on the dollar bill and look at the Federal Reserve Bank where the money was made. Now, as you can think about that exercise, and how children's minds work, as my son does that, guess what? He's learning where all of the Federal Reserve banks are in the country.
Beautiful.
So, see, we're learning to think about wealth and how money works. See, other groups do that at home or other ways, but don't forget, our history is short. We've got to learn those things. So my point is, to me, if we look forward in preparing ourselves and teaching ourselves and our children.
Royland Reed is with us, and we're trying to find a solution to race in America. And once again, Royland, we want to thank you for joining us. We've got a lot of folks standing by on the phone lines to talk about this. But Royland, also in this AP poll, we're finding, too, that the American people are having a prejudice attitudes towards Hispanics and Latinos as well.
And we do see that, of course, the emphasis are different, but, we're hearing so much in the news as well just about the migration issue and immigrant issue, things of that nature. And once again, Robert, really what we're hearing is nothing new.
Yes, ma'am.
I think the good thing is we're talking about it. It's coming up to the surface. It's not just below. And that's when real change comes about, when it comes up to the surface. But some of the things that the Latinos and, our brown brothers and sisters, their issues have been going on for a long time.
And of course, I'm just looking at this poll. It has such interesting information here. It says that the poll finds that racial prejudice is not limited to just one group. It's out there. And, I mean, you've seen this report, and I'm not trying to point a finger at Republicans, but is the poll trying to suggest that a lot of this is coming from Republicans, or did Democrats express some racial attitudes, prejudice as well?
A lot of people do get mixed up in the politics or just what they hear on the TV. A lot of this, as we know, it's just been going around. It's been more or less water cooler talk, I call it.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Now, also, the Attorney General at one time, I think, made the statement that the American people were a bunch of cowards and that we did not want to talk or deal with this issue. As a nation, are we in denial over this race issue?
Prejudice is usually what I describe a ghost. We all know it exists, but it's hard to put your hand on it because it's the elephant in the room that people don't want to talk about. From one side or the other, but we usually do it behind closed doors. We all have to be, even look at ourselves, because how often do we tell maybe certain jokes that, we would say with one group but not another?
Yes.
So it goes on all the time, and it's just something that we as people do, that we all have to stop and look at ourselves and the roles we play and our backgrounds, exposures, and how we choose to operate.
And Roland, I promise my last question before we take some phone calls here. Now, dealing with this race issue as a nation, is that the job of a politician, or is that the job of the church? Or a combination of both, or what do you think?
I believe, Robert, it has to be a combination of all of it, of both groups. The church definitely has a role to play. What are we doing? How are we talking about? Even like with politics, are we voting straight down the political line, or are we voting on issues? How does that work? And if we really look at the church, are we divided that most mainstream Caucasian churches vote Republican? And do most African American churches vote Democrat?
Yes, indeed.
Or a combination of both? Do we ever change? So I think there's a lot that we just have to look at within ourselves and looking at issues and just perspectives. But it's going to be I think it's going to be the responsibility of both groups. But the church definitely has a main role to play. And if we even look at the movement starting with Martin Luther King Jr., everything has always been rooted in the church.
Amen, amen. Well, once again, talking here with diversity expert, training expert, Roland Reed. Let's go ahead and take a quick call here. We've got Clark, who is standing by to kind of kick some things off for us today. And Clark, we thank you for calling. You're on with Roland Reed. Clark?
No, this is Ray, Robert.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ray. Okay, thank you for calling, Ray. You're on with Roland.
How you doing, and to your guests? Look, Robert, first off, I want to challenge that study. I mean, I don't have a percentage, and I guess anybody's percentage would be questionable, but 51%, I think the Aryan Nation or the Ku Klux Klan has come out with that number. I mean, because I think me and my family, we have discussed this during the holidays. That number would be way up there, Robert, because people don't understand the type of racism we're dealing with today is not like we dealt with yesterday when it was obvious, you know. I mean, we're dealing with a more advanced type of racism. And then I want to challenge anybody about the churches. The churches, you know, I understand Martin Luther King came from there and with his message, but the average preacher today, they don't preach that message. They tell you how to get to heaven, but they can't tell you how to live here and deal with racism. They won't challenge racism. They won't even talk about it. They won't even try to galvanize the community to start shop on each other to where we can be self-sufficient. I mean, it's amazing how so-called leaders are dumbing down the people because most people listen to them, but they're dumbing us down. They don't want to even talk about racism no more. And then why should we only hear about racism in February? It's happening every day.
Yes, sir, Ray. All right, well, let's turn to our expert. And, Ray, once again, we thank you so much for that call. Ray seemed to suggest, Roland, that 51% that there may be more prejudice out there and that our churches have, I guess, abdicated the responsibility to deal with the issue of social justice from the pulpit. What do you think, Roland?
Sure, and I appreciate, you know, what Ray said. And I think one good point, Ray, that you made as well is, and that's what I was alluding to, is a lot of things are still here, but it's taken a different form, and that's that ghost thing. It's hard to face. And so often, too, especially when you know, talk to a lot of our, you know, black men, it's still very painful with some of the things. I can think of one male I recently talked to. He says, you know, I'm a professional, I dress a certain way, but wherever I go, it's real hurtful and painful when I see a white female grab her purse just when I walk by. How do you measure that? How do you say she did not make any racial slurs? It's not like they did not have access to the same place. But those are the things that are still hurtful, whether or not that woman, you know, realized it. And that's where it needs to be covered both ways. Because even if the pain is real and we know about forgiveness and getting through things, regardless, that is painful. And I think that's one point that Ray is making. Things of that nature, there's so many things that, you know, our pastors cover, but even how do you deal with the pain from day to day and every day?
Yes,
you know, so even from that end, I can see that angle to, you know, be covered as well.
Amen. Well, once again, we're talking here with Roland Reed, and let's take some more calls here on Heaven 97 Kitchen. We're talking about race, talking about an Associated Press poll here, and we're trying to find a positive solution to race in America. I remember former President Bill Clinton at one time, Roland, was thinking about coming to Dallas, Texas, and holding a conversation, a dialogue about race in America. And just think about that for a second, because I got to pause right now for just a quick break. Should President Barack Obama hold a nation town hall meeting on every network and say, let's once and for all address this race thing? Got to pause right now for just a quick break. And Roland, once you give us a thought about that, when we get back, we'll be back with more right after this. Right now, we're talking with a very distinguished sister here by the name of Roland Reed. And Roland is a diversity training expert, and she's doing great things in our nation, great things for America as we talk about this given topic. And we've got Reverend Tony, Clark, and Joe on the line. But one quick question here, Roland. Should the president have a big town hall meeting on this issue, or would there be some backlash to doing something like this?
Well, Robert, in my opinion, I said right now, too, is if anything we Christians can do is truly pray for President Barack Obama. Now, right now, I think he has a huge issue as president of the United States of America, trying to deal with the diversity and political issues that's going on with Congress.
Yes.
So if we can get that together with our national debt and all of these things that are looming and the war that he has going on there, if he can handle that and we can pray for him, that will help all of us now and down the road. But I think a lot of that can come even with the church. How do we begin to look at that, in the communities and people? And as Ray mentioned, the hurt. That's what our pastors do well. How do we deal with the hurt and the inner feelings? And even if we start there with the platform, but if you look over our just over the centuries, any great change that has ever happened always happens from the grassroots up, not from the top down.
Yes.
Always. So that's where I think the time is coming for our church and for the people of God to make a difference, and even how do we begin to unify ourselves within our own churches, but also across lines in churches that may be different from us.
Yes. And and I promise our listeners, I've got to get back to the phone lines, but you spoke of hurt, and I just sensed something in my spirit when you talked about that. Now, take, for example, back during the presidential campaign, there were many of our fellow Americans who were hurt when we saw all of these. President Barack Obama, he was depicted in effigy, people hanging the president. We saw them place him looking like a monkey, all these assassination attempts. How do we heal from that, Roland? And then we'll take some calls.
And I think, too, one thing we have to look at it, too, is most times, let's say the 20/80 rule, unfortunately, things on the enemy's camp usually is, we hear like a mouse with a megaphone.
Yes.
There are more good people in our country than there are bad. And I think we just have to keep it in perspective.
Yes.
And just think of all of the good people that we know and things that are happening. I think one of the greatest things, and I live vicariously through a friend who, and so many of our Christian brothers and sisters have, gone to Israel. But one trip that a very close friend of mine went on with a tour guide, the main thing is everything the tour guide showed them was what Jesus did was practical in his environment. Now, why did Jesus use this tree? Now, of course, everyone had these answers. And they said, why did he go out on the boat to talk to the people, served as a megaphone for us on those? That's what can we do to make a difference. That's even what the National Day of Service was really all about as well.
All right, let's take a quick call here. Let's go to, we've got Clark on the line there. And once again, if you're just now joining us, we're talking here about race. There's an Associated Press poll that came out suggesting 51% of the American people have increased racial attitudes towards people of color, particularly African Americans in this nation. And we're talking right now with Roland Reed, a diversity training expert. And we just happened to have this conversation during Black History Month. And Clark, we thank you. You're on with Roland. Clark?
Hey, how you doing, Robert?
Pretty good, Clark.
I want to say congratulations to your guest, Ms. Roland. What I wanted to ask Robert is, since she is one of the directors or founders of the Diversified, do she have a setup for our schools where the teachers could get with one another to know the backgrounds of all the students? Seems like we're kind of stuck on just black and white, but we have other people in the world besides black and white. So I want to know, at this time, do we have a system set up in our schools where our students can know the different backgrounds of each other, where they can get along? It starts at the bottom.
Yes, sir.
See, the old people, they done got past, they're just doing the same old thing they used to, hating on one another, and God ain't pleased with that.
All right, Clark. Well, let's see. Well, Clark, once again, thank you for bringing that point up. And Roland, what's in place for our children?
Also, too, what we have to look at is a lot of times, too, our school districts are all different and they're run differently. So there are different programs that go on, and some might have groups for that, for different ethnic groups as well. So, unfortunately, that's a question that can't be answered globally because it depends on in the school. But once again, it's important for parents and even older students to ask, what is there and what's going on? You know, what can we do, or what kind of programs that can happen as well? And I think what, Clark mentioned as well is so important because they don't see a difference. And even when they say something, they innocently say it is no strings attached, nothing tied. They're like, that is a difference there.
Yes,
but what we do know is as they get older, children become tainted by adults.
Yes.
Or, things that are put in the environment that foster that. I think that's a good point that Clark has made, but my suggestion would be if you have children or an interest, find out and inquire at the school. It goes back to how do we get involved again? That's just a basic question. Find out what's going on, and two is what can you do to make a difference? It's so interesting, Robert.
Yes, ma'am.
I think we forget those basics. The question is, what can I do to make a difference? And usually we forget that, because we have our teachers, our pastors, even a lot of our political leaders. We have, as people, have to become more proactive. I do spend a lot of time in Washington, D.C., and on multiple occasions when I'm with someone who may be a presidential appointee, or they may be leading up an agency or group, and I really do a lot in the small business advocacy area. But I have gone up to someone and I asked them, what can I do as a small business owner or person, or what can other small business owners or people do to help you and make a difference? Because most of our civil servants, they're really there trying to do the best they can, trying to make a difference in that 20-80 rule. I probably imagine at least 80 of them. And you know what has been so surprising every time what they say? They said, Royland, if you could share with us some success stories of what's going on that's good. That's what they want to know.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Tell us some success stories so we can get it up there and share it, as well as get it duplicated. Bringing that back to what Clark is saying, check with your schools. First of all, ask. But when you ask, remember, everybody is challenged with doing more with less on our jobs, everywhere.
Yes.
But just think about, what can I do to make a difference?
We're talking with Royland Reed, a diversity training expert, and we're talking about racial attitudes in America. All right, well, Royland, I tell you what, it's been fantastic talking with you and just asking you questions about diversity in America. And this nation of ours, we do believe in America and that we are indeed going to move forward here. And as we're closing here, the biracial daughter of the late Senator Strom Thurmond, who was fathered through an affair with the family's maid, has died, we understand. South Carolina officials say that Ms. Essie Mae Washington Williams passed away Monday at the age of 87. And, when we look at those type of relations, I guess that's one of the reasons why this nation needs to sit down and not be afraid to talk about race. And by the way, Roland, how can people find out a little bit more about you?
Robert, you can look me up. We have a website, and my contact information is on there, too, which is the CMIteam.com from Consumer and Market Insights, which is my company. But like I said, our website has lots of information as well as contact information, which is www.thecmiteam.com.
Amen. Well, Roland, once again, we thank you so much for your time, and you being the diversity expert. We thank you for helping America deal with this issue of race, and hopefully we can stay in touch with you. May the Lord continue to bless you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Okay, Robert. Bye-bye.
Oh, I want to thank her for being with us, Royland Reed, and also to thank State Representative Helen Giddings, who spent some time with us early on in the program.